Welcome to Read Between the Lines, a book podcast. I am your host, Molly Southgate, and today I'm interviewing
Bryan Gruley.
Hey there, how are you doing today?
Okay, how are you?
I am doing well. I'm very excited to be chatting with you. So, can you tell me a bit about your writing?
Well, I've been writing since I was a boy, making up stories about my version of the Hardy Boys mysteries for my second grade class at St. Gemma Elementary in Detroit, where I grew up. And professionally, though, I spent most of my career, 41 years, as a journalist for some small papers and then the Detroit News, the Wall Street Journal, and Business Week. And in the latter part of my career, for fun, I started writing novels. I wrote my first one, and I learned I didn't really intend this, Molly, but my agent told me this is a mystery. So I guess I was writing mysteries, and I've been doing that since. And my mysteries tend to be set in my home state of Michigan. So of the 6 books, 4 are set in the northern Lower Peninsula, and 2 are set in the southwestern Michigan on Lake Michigan itself. And I like doing it. It's fun to make stuff up.
So, I want to ask more about you not realizing quite yet that it would be classified as a mystery. What did you intend it to be in your first writing?
Well, I didn't think about genre because I'd read in my own reading of novels, fiction. I was all over the place. And I'd read my share of thrillers and mysteries, and I'd read my share of stuff that wouldn't be put on the mystery or thriller shelf, and I enjoyed almost all of it. So I just set out to tell a story. And when I got into it and showed it to my at the time agent, she said, "Well, this is a literary mystery," she said, which I understand is sort of a compliment, although I think most mysteries and thrillers and crime fiction, many of them are literary.
Mm-hmm.
Most of them are.
I absolutely agree. I've interviewed countless mystery authors on this show, and I think that they're so brilliant. I love hearing like the craft behind it. I'd like to know a little bit more about how you kind of plotted this out, or if you did outline how that looked.
Um, I don't outline. I wish I could outline. I have friends who not only know the beginning and the ending, but every little scene in between. And how wonderful that would be, because as a journalist, and I wrote a lot of long form narrative nonfiction, I always knew 99% of the story before I wrote it. And I would make these elaborate chronologies of what I knew from all my interviewing and research, and then just winnow the chronologies down into a narrative. It was great. I didn't have to worry about why am I doing this now when 150 pages from now it's going to have an effect that I don't know what it is. But I have tried to outline, Molly, and I just can't get anywhere because I create, I have something bad happens at the beginning of the book. I know that. And I have 2 or 3 characters I know I want to write about, but I can't predict what they're going to do without putting them on a page in a situation with another character, and see how they behave. And I, I guess that's a shortcoming. It doesn't really matter. It is what it is, and that's how I go. And what I tell myself is, frequently I am surprised by what happens in my novels. And I take some flyers that turn out to be surprises. And if I'm surprised, I think uh, it's likely that the reader will be surprised. And readers generally like surprises, as long as they're earned. It's not just flying werewolves showing up out of nowhere to save the day. That's a joke. But Yeah, I wish I could outline.
You know what? I am the same way. This is a safe space for non-outliners.
Yeah.
I'm curious though, what do you feel like powers the story? I know that a lot of people that I've had on when they say that they don't outline, they usually talk about it being more of a drive from the characters or them in the moment just kind of working through it almost like a math problem. How do you approach it?
It's really character driven for me, and I as I said, something bad happens, and I put two or three characters in this situation. They're not all they all have different perspectives or different jobs to do, for lack of a better word, in this situation. So in my new book, Bitterfrost, you have the main character who's accused of a murder. You have his defense attorney, a younger woman, and you have a detective. So they're all doing different things that revolve around the same two dead bodies found in this little town in northern Michigan I invented called Bitterfrost. And so then um, I put the character on the page and I let him or her behave. And And then, so that creates some tension that I have to have the next character play off of, and then the next character, and then I sort of toggle between these threes. So it's really character for me. It's character driven, but they're creating plot, and the more plot you create, the more balls you put up in the air. Um, the more you have to be conscious. You can't just keep throwing balls in the air without bringing most of them down, if not all.
Mhm.
And so as I go, I do this sort of reverse outline where every few chapters I go back and I read the chapter and I write a little summary of it. So I have this file called contents, and it says chapter 53 from Devon's point of view. And then there's just really brief little sentences that describe what happened in there. I hate doing it because it's tedious, but it's very useful to me because number one, I reread the chapter and I make little changes as I'm going. Why did I have that there? That's stupid, or that's a bad word. I make little helpful changes, but I'm also reminding myself of the balls I've thrown into the air and of the little tensions that build into larger tensions. And so I find it helpful. And then there's the more utilitarian thing of something happened, and I'm now in chapter 50, and something happened that I wrote 3 months ago, and I don't remember exactly what it was, but now I have this handy reference where I can just flip back, and it's just a bunch of long paragraphs describing chapters, rather than going back and flitting through a whole bunch of long chapters.
Oh, that is such a brilliant plan for that because I feel like those moments where like all of the tiny threads come together,
Hmm.
especially for the author, or like the greatest, like those aha moments. And I feel like
Yeah,
that really
yeah,
powers it if you know kind of what the threads are and you can really immerse yourself in the writing of it.
yes. Although, when I stop and do this, as I said, it's tedious because I'm not actually writing anymore. But in a way, you are. I was reading a friend, Gabino Iglesias, was saying the other day, I went back and cut 2,000 words today. So he didn't add any words to his manuscript, but he thought what he cut needed to be cut and it improved the story. So even though it's not I did 1,000 words today, it's still making progress because you're progressing towards the story you want to tell.
Yes.
Or
Oh,
you think you want to tell.
yes.
Yeah,
That's such a win for writers too that I feel like is often goes unsung.
yeah.
The chopping down and the taking out parts. Could you share any moments from this most recent book from Bitter Frost where you kind of had to like kill your darlings or you cut something out that ended up serving the story?
Well, I periodically will print out the last 3 or 4 or 5 chapters I've written, and take a pencil and mark them up. And most of the marking up is taking out words, phrases, sentences. Sometimes it's moving scenes around, but not usually. Usually it's just trimming, clipping, clarifying. And I, I like doing that. And I learned this as a journalist, really. Uh, I like the tactile feel of the pencil striking out words or sentences or even whole paragraphs. Um, because I believe usually if it's getting shorter, it's getting better. Not all, it's there are exceptions to that rule. But in the case of Bitterfrost, probably the biggest change I made was after I had sold it to Severn House, and my editor at that time, Victoria Britton, I should say brilliant because of what she asked me to do. She said, really, I think chapter 6 should be chapter 1. So, I'm a writer and I got an ego and I'm insecure. And I hear this and I'm like, well, geez, it's going to take a lot of work, yada, yada. And then in about 10 minutes, I realized she was absolutely right. And now I look at it and say, wow, she really was absolutely right. So one reviewer said, it's as close to brilliant as any first chapter you'll find in crime fiction. And I thought, what do you mean close to brilliant? Um, I'm kidding. But it really worked. It really just, bam, you're in the story, you know? So God bless Vic. And, it took some work, but it was so worth it. And when I was done, I was like, yes, it works.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, it was fun.
Can you share a little bit about the plot of Bitterfrost for our audience to hear?
Sure. So Bitterfrost is about essentially about a guy named Jimmy Baker who grew up in this little town of Bitterfrost, which is a made up town. It would sit on Lake Michigan in the lower peninsula of Michigan's northwest corner. It has a river that runs through the middle of town called the Jaco River, which is it's Finnish for division, which plays into the novel. And Jimmy was well. The thing that animates this town is hockey. They have a really good elite amateur team, teenagers. And Jimmy was a star for that team, and he got by the National Hockey League, and he ended up in the minors. And he's big, he's strong, and he has an edge for reasons that become apparent as you read. And they turn him into a fighter, and he is a very efficient and vicious fighter. One night, he almost kills an opponent, and he quits the game on the spot, walks away. 13 years later, this is when the book opens. Jimmy is now the Zamboni driver for that team in the Ice Kings. See my shirt? This is the Ice Kings.
Oh, cool.
Swag. Yeah, thank you. Jimmy's the Zamboni driver for that team, and he has lost his wife. He's estranged from his daughter. He went through all sorts of litigation hell because of what he did to that guy who never played again. And he's just living this solitary life and trying to be a good guy. Every day is a penance, he tells himself. And his routine is to finish up at the rink in the evening and then go to the Lost Loon Tavern and have one highball. You're probably too young to know what a highball is, but it's whiskey and 7-Up, I believe. Um, and he goes to the Lost Loon one night, and there are a couple of guys in there, young guys. They're drunk. They're obviously from the Detroit area, and they're hassling the barmaid, who's a friend of Jimmy's. So he tries to gently intervene, and things happen. And the next thing Jimmy knows, he's waking up on his kitchen floor. He's covered in blood. His head hurts. His hands hurt. He's missing a boot. He doesn't know where his phone is. He doesn't really know what happened. And some hours later, one of those two knuckleheads is found beaten to death, not far from Jimmy, actually. And then the other one's found a few days later, and Jimmy becomes the suspect, and we're off to the races. The elevator pitch is a Zamboni driver is accused of a brutal double murder. And people go, "A what?"
It's such a fantastic plot. Where did you get the idea for that? Where did it come from?
Well, the initiating force came from a fight that occurred in the National Hockey League 21 years ago. A forward named Todd Bertuzzi, played for Vancouver, got into it with a forward for Colorado named Steve Moore. And it was a violent fight. And Moore sustained injuries that prevented him from ever playing again. And Bertuzzi went through his own civil and criminal litigation hell. Did resume his career eventually and had a decent career. And I pass no judgment on either of those guys. I don't know what happened between them or all the details. But I'm a hockey player, so it bothered me. And what I thought was, how how do you cope with the idea that you may have ruined somebody else's life?
Mhm.
And that was the animating idea that compelled me to create Jimmy Baker, who deals with that question every day. Every day is a penance, he says. And of course, his past, Jimmy's past, comes back to haunt him when these guys get found because, um, Jimmy doesn't know exactly what happened and he hopes he didn't commit this crime, but he knows he's capable.
Mhm.
And that tension runs through the investigation and the trial, right up to the very last scene in the book. At
Wow.
least I think so.
It's such a
It's
powerful
brilliant.
emotional through line throughout that. So I'd like to know a little bit more about you as a writer. Can you share, were there any lessons that you learned from working as a journalist that you've now translated over to your fiction writing?
Oh yeah. I mean, just there's a bright line for me. I was doing both for many years, and I have a bright line between making stuff up and not making stuff up. But from being a newspaper and magazine writer for many years, I learned from many other good people economy of words. I learned deadlines are your friend; they're not your enemy. If you must get it done, you will get it done and live to fight another day. So I'm not intimidated by deadlines. That they're in a way they're less imposing in fiction
Mhm.
because they're not for months. Um, so I learned that. I told a lot of I wrote a lot of long form narratives where you start at A and you go through L and then you end up at Z. Beginning, middle, end, and that's what most novels do. I learned a lot about observation, listening, hearing, tasting, smelling, and using those little tiny details to propel people into the places I was going.
Mhm.
And in my case, I loved going to little towns to tell nonfiction stories. Hill City, Kansas, Regent, North Dakota, Stillwell, Oklahoma, Marquette, Michigan, etc. And so gravitating towards little towns in my novels has been sort of natural for me, even though I didn't grow up in a little town. I grew up in a suburb of Detroit. But, the towns in my novels, Starvation Lake, Bleak Harbor, and now Bitterfrost, are all modeled on little towns in Michigan. that I've been a part of.
Mhm. Now, with those towns, are those sort of an amalgamation of different ones that you visited, or do they have like direct links to certain areas?
Well, the first three novels are set in a fictional town of Starvation Lake. I stole the name from a lake that I'm very familiar with because I've been coming up to northern Michigan since I was a boy. There's no town on Starvation Lake, but I worked at a little paper in a town called Bel Air, not far from Starvation Lake. So I took the name and I took Bel Air and I stuck a lake on Bel Air. And when I was creating Starvation Lake, in my mind's eye, I could see Bel Air.
Mhm.
Um, Similarly, with Bleak Harbor, excuse me, I picked a town that's in southwestern Michigan called Saugatuck. And I went there to do a story for the Journal, the Wall Street Journal. And I was struck by Saugatuck partly because even though it's technically right on Lake Michigan, the town is actually on a little bay that connects to the lake through a channel, which is kind of cool. But also, the precursor to Saugatuck was a town called Singapore that got buried in a sand dune in the 1700s or something, or 1800s. And I read about this. I was like, oh man, that's so cool. I got to write about that. And then Bitterfrost looks like another town in Michigan called it's Manistee, which is about halfway up the western coast of Michigan. It's a small town that sits on a river, just like or a creek, just like Bitterfrost. And I went to Manistee for the Journal to write a story about a guy who killed a buck with his bare hands. Crazy story, hilarious, hilarious story. Uh, so I got to know Manistee, and then when I was casting about, I thought "Yeah, it's such a cool town. I want to use Manistee for this. And then I can't remember, Molly, how I came up with the name Bitterfrost, but I
Oh,
like it. It's an arresting name, you know.
it is, and it also, I mean, having grown up, like going to Michigan several times and
Oh
like
yeah,
being in the Midwest type area and everything, it totally sounds like one of those small towns. Like I feel like
yeah,
I've seen it or I've been there, but it also
huh,
has that really gripping mystery element to it.
yeah. I hope so. You know,
Have
the way the book looks, and I love the cover, but it looks like it's two words, but
mm,
it's not. It's just one word, Bitterfrost. There's no capital F. There's no space. But that's okay. People see it that way because of the way the artist was just did such an awesome job with the cover. It was and it fit. You know, the image he uses actually figures in the plot of the book.
interesting.
Yeah.
So, kind of a little bit more about Starvation Lake. Can you tell me a bit about that series and did the writing process for that look different than the process for Bitterfrost, or was it pretty similar?
Well, you know, when I wrote Starvation Lake, it was my first novel. I had no idea what I was doing, and it was fits and starts, and it took me 4 years to write that book. And I remember after I wrote the first draft, um, I thought of something that it was such a big twist and changed the whole book. And I went back and I actually had it printed out and bound at a Kinko's, and and then I would mark it up with a pen or a pencil and post-its and legal pad pages and this 2 inch thick document became like 4 inches thick with stuff. And then I sat it when I moved to Chicago in that time, and I was on my own for a few months. And I would just set it on the couch next to me on my laptop and incorporate these 80,000 changes. So that was a much more intensive process, but I was learning how to write a novel.
Mhm.
Um, and so Starvation came from I had wanted to write a novel, and I wrote maybe a third of one and showed it to my agent. And she said, not this. She knew I played hockey. She said, why don't you write me a story about these middle aged guys who play hockey in the middle of the night? And I immediately had an idea, which I won't share because it's a big spoiler.
Okay.
But I had this idea and I told her, and she said, oh, that's always a winner. It's something really bad. So um, so I wrote Starvation Lake, and that's a first person narrative, which just felt more natural starting out to write in first person. And Gus Carpenter, the narrator, is a goaltender who also works at a little newspaper in Starvation Lake that looks like the little paper I worked at in Bel Air this summer of my before my senior year in college. I was an intern. I remember when I was working on the novel, I was having lunch with a couple of pals from the Journal in Washington, and I told them I was working on a novel, and one of them, who's now at the New York Times, said, "Please tell me it's not about a hockey playing journalist."
Oh,
So, but he loves my books, and so I wrote that, and over the course of a year, it got 26 rejections by publishers. And I kind of thought, okay, that didn't work. I'm going to try something else. And, I'll write some other book. And then one day my agent called and said, Simon and Schuster wanted three Starvation. Well, they wanted that one and two more. So I got a 3-book deal. I never thought of it as a series. I just thought of it as just one story. And in fact, my editor said, you need to change the ending because it closes things off too much. We want the reader to want to go back to Starvation Lake. And actually, it was a good idea anyway. I liked the way it ended better after Trish told me what to do. And then I wrote, I actually wrote, the next book was not good. And we threw that away. And I rewrote that in well, I didn't rewrite it. I wrote a whole new book in 7 months. That became The Hanging Tree, which may have my favorite character of all, Gracie McBride, who's found hanging in a tree filled with shoes on apparent suicide. And then The Skeleton Box, and then I moved to Bleak Harbor, and now I'm in Bitterfrost. I move around a lot.
so many different towns, and you want to.
Yeah, I think this is going to be it. I'm not going. I mean, there are other towns incorporated in these books. A lot of them real because it's Detroit's in there, Kalamazoo is in there, Chicago's in Bleak Harbor in particular. Um, yeah,
That is so fascinating to hear the process, and I feel like that that's something that's like is so important for a writer is to get that first attempt out there, like what you were saying about your second novel, where you wrote a whole book and you're like, this
yeah.
isn't right. And so you wrote a whole other
Well,
one and it ended up
my
having
yeah,
very
my
big
editor
success.
said she said, "Well, we have a lot of work to do," and what she meant was this sucks.
Oh,
It was right.
but it created an even better product out of that, which is like
Yeah, yeah, it would,
the
yeah,
best we can all hope for as writers. I think that's fantastic.
yeah. You got to just keep pitching. Some days you have your fastball, and some days you don't.
Absolutely. Well, this has just been such a fantastic interview. Thank you for
Thank
being
you.
on the show.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you for your great questions, Molly.
I just have one more question, and that is,
Okay.
what do you have coming up?
Well, Severn House, my publisher, asked me last summer, "Would you like to do a second Bitterfrost book?" And I sent him a 300 or 400 word pitch. So I'm writing that. It's tentatively called River Deep, and it's about something really bad that happens on a river. I probably shouldn't say it. We don't want to end on that bad of a note, but it does involve um, well, the three main characters from Bitterfrost carry over into this book: Jimmy, his lawyer Devin Payne, the detective Garth Klimek. But Jimmy is not a major character in this book. So Devin, the attorney, remains. Detective Klimek remains, and there are two other characters, new characters, who emerge in this book, and it's a really bad thing that happens, and I got to figure out. I'm 73,000 words in, and I have no idea how it's going to end.
It's a very exciting place to be.
Oh yeah,
I know in the
easy for
moment it
you to
doesn't feel
say.
that way, but that
So
is
excited! I don't know what the hell I'm doing.
all right. Well, I am excited to read it, and I
Thank
hope
you.
that the audience goes and checks out all of the fantastic books we've talked about today.
I do
Thank
too.
you again for coming on the show.
Thank you.
For Read Between the Lines, my name is Molly Southgate.
I'm Bryan Gruley.
Let's end this the way all great stories end. Happily ever after.
The end.
Thank you for listening to Read Between the Lines, a book podcast. You can follow the show on Instagram and Facebook at Read Between the Lines Podcast and on Twitter at RBTL Podcast. Make sure to follow the authors who I've been talking to hear all about their upcoming projects, and also because they're cool people. This show is hosted by me, Molly Southgate, and produced and edited by my dad, Rob Southgate. Read Between the Lines is a Southgate Media Group production, and you can find all the great content put on by the network at southgatemediagroup.com. You can read the story of how I and many other podcasters started in the anthology book Pod Life, which you'll find at the link in the show notes. Also in the show notes are links to buy the books featured on this episode. Using those links supports this show and the incredible authors being interviewed. Have a great week and keep reading.